प्रकाशस्य रूपमधिकम् प्रच्छन्नगुप्तं धनम् विद्याभोगकरी यशः सुखकरी विद्या गुरुणा गुरुः विद्याबन्धुजनो विदेशगमने विद्या परं दैवतम् विद्याराजसु पूज्यते न तु धनम् विद्याविहीनः पशुः विद्या प्रशस्यते लोकैः विद्या सर्वत्र गौरवा विद्यया लभते सर्वम् विद्वान् सर्वत्र पूज्यते ज्ञानेन सदृशं पवित्रमिह विद्यते न हि ज्ञानेन सदृशं पवित्रमिह विद्यते न हि ज्ञानेन सदृशं पवित्रमिह विद्यते.
Dr. Mitali Shelankar has done her Masters in Commerce, Masters in Education and MBA in HR. She has pursued her Diploma in HR and Diploma in Management of Education from the University of Mumbai. She also holds a Ph.D. degree in the subject of Banking and Finance. She started her journey at M.L.Dahanukar College in 2009 and currently working as the Co-ordinator of Department of Bachelor of Management Studies. She has co-authored several textbooks of the undergraduate level and has published 2 books of the postgraduate level too. She has also presented and published several research papers at the national and international conferences. She strongly believes that a good teacher is like a rising sun that comes to fill the minds of millions with the light of education. Her humongous love for teaching has made her strong in the field of education. Indian banking being one of the most structured banking services all over the world, her Ph.D. research focused on the banking sector. She has done a research on organizational effectiveness and climate of 2 leading banks of the country, Canara Bank from the public sector and Axis Bank from the private sector. She has collected data from the employees and other bank officials working in the above mentioned banks. Her study provides suggestions to the banks to enhance their effectiveness and make their organizational climate more healthy. Welcome, Vidyavachaspati, Dr. Mitali Shelankar.
Namaskar. A very warm welcome and warm greetings to all the people who would be watching this YouTube video. Before I formally start with the presentation, my heartfelt thanks to the management of PTVA to give us an opportunity and a platform like Vidyavachaspati, where every researcher with confidence can share and disseminate the important findings of the research. Talking about this journey of research journey is like a hiking trail. You don't know where you are going to land up, but if you want this definiteness and specificity for a successful research, there are 3 things which every researcher should have embedded in himself. The first one is your passion for your research, something where you are going to explore something new. The second thing, what I will call it as a positive attitude. The journey is a long way to go. So there will be moments of depression, there will be moments of sorrow, there will be moments of failures. You need to succumb to all this, and with your passion, your positive attitude and learning perseverance, which is the third P, which is required for a successful research, you will be able to successfully complete your research study. So with this, I would now formally begin with the presentation of my PhD research. I have done my PhD in the field of banking and finance, and the topic reads as a comparative study. It's a comparative study of two banks, two leading banks of the nation, with respect to their effectiveness and with respect to this climate. How did this story begin? Every research is like a funnel. The entire research process can be compared to a funnel, where the tip of the funnel is very broad and you have to narrow it down. The process of narrowing down will actually add and make your research topic more specific. So this would first, although even though we say that in books you might have come across, formulation of research problem is the first step. It is not actually the first step in practicality. It requires, for narrowing down the research to a specific area, it requires you to do a lot of literature. So the same thing happened with me. When I was just going through the report given by the Morgan Stanley Bank, it stated that India is going to be one of the world's largest economy, even surpassing Japan and Germany by 2027. And it is also going to be the largest stock markets by 2030. So with this very sentence, I just started thinking that banks have really an important role to play. When we talk about banks, these banks are a backbone of global economy. They provide credit, they provide investment, they provide infrastructure. So indeed a multifaceted role where public entrust all their faith in the banks and they keep their deposits, the money deposits in the bank. So indeed they are truly called as the catalyst of economic development of the country. Moreover, if we look at Indian banking, one of the most structured banking system all over the world, this kind of banking system is really a prerequisite for social welfare. So that is why without sound and effective banks of the country, a country can never have a healthy economy. This is what the very first thought gave me, that I'm definitely going to research something on banking. Further, with the further reading of various articles, research thesis, I found that in the growing days, this study was before pre-COVID. So, there was a lot of competition. In India, we look at different types of banks, public sector banks, private sector banks, and there is a lot of competition among the banking field. With the advent of internet, with the growing emphasis on app-based transactions, more focus on customer centricity, all this has brought about a drastic revolution in the banking field. Banks are also using n number of technologies which have provided a lot of advantages to the bankers, but at the same time it has also posed number of challenges and has also been one of the reasons for increased competition among different banks. Moreover, in the era of digital banking, where various banks are undertaking continuous efforts, and these efforts are different initiatives where they are revamping their crucial strategies, they are redesigning their structures. All this has been done to ensure the effective and smooth working of the banks. Moreover, while going through the articles, I have also come across that people have studied the effectiveness, the efficiency of banks in terms of various financial parameters. Economists have also studied in their own different ways. So my curiosity as a researcher was whether all these efforts that are taken by the banks to make them really are, whether they are adding to the effectiveness of the banks, and also they are enabling their own employees to have a better opinion about the climate that is existing in the bank, was my research, was my curiosity, to which I decided that I am going to compare the banks, the leading banks of the country across two variables, one being organizational effectiveness and another being the internal climate of the organization, what we technically call it as an organizational climate. For a good research, it is not only necessary to narrow down the study, but how do we come across or how do we finalize the topic? For this, after going through the different books, after going through the different theses, the articles, it is necessary to understand what we call it as literature gaps. So, before I could define the variables of the study pertaining to my research, I would just like to say that regarding organizational effectiveness, there were almost 75 studies that I have seen I have read with respect to organizational effectiveness, been studied with reference to different models of effectiveness, different factors that affect the effectiveness, and relationship of effectiveness with different variables like stress, job satisfaction, commitment, and also the same has been compared with on the basis of different demographic variables. Similarly, coming to the climate, a review was extensive review. Almost 76 studies were reviewed with respect to the different models, types of organizational climate, what are the determinants of the climate, and how does a climate differ from a culture, and the important relationship of climate with other important variables of the organization. So, to make this study more specific, when I was going through the literature graph clearly identified that both these aspects have been studied with various kinds of different types of or OB, or what you say, different concepts of OB. But there were very few studies which were actually focusing on the relationship, whether there is a relationship between climate and effectiveness was the real gap that was identified. And that is why, as a researcher, I decided to operationally define the study in terms of its concepts. So you always, as a researcher, when you begin your research journey, once you narrow down the topic, once you decide the variables of the study, the next step is you have to define those variables in terms of your research. This definition, we will call it as an operational definition of the study. So whatever books have to offer you, these are the technical definitions. In effectiveness is maybe also studied in terms of effective bank is also a bank which is profitable bank, which has got more liquid assets. But for the purpose of my study, I have defined organizational effectiveness in terms of different variables, in terms of different dimensions. The first dimension being strategy, a plan where everybody has been given there is an appropriate division of work amongst the employees. The second dimension being the structure, the hierarchical relationship between the employees in the organization. The third important dimension was the presence of leadership qualities and presence of good leaders in the organization. Fourth aspect of effectiveness was the presence of good people management system, which will provide important information to the people and disseminate this information at different levels of management. The fifth aspect under effectiveness was the value systems. What kind of norms, beliefs are practiced and cherished in this organization, in the bank from time to time. And the last aspect under which organizational effectiveness was studied was with respect to customer experiences. What steps banks are taking to develop loyal customers after understanding their needs, take and understanding their feedback about different products. So this is how strategy, structure, people management systems, value systems, customer experiences and leaderships were some of the broad aspects or the dimensions under which the first variable, organizational effectiveness, was studied. Coming to the second variable of the study, organizational climate. For the purpose of defining organizational climate operationally, various dimensions were used. The first one being role clarity. It is extremely important that there should not be any role crisis or identity crisis in the organization. People know what is expected of them. That is what is meant by role clarity. The second aspect was work standards. No mediocrity will be accepted. People must be very clear about the benchmarks and accordingly have their work standards maintained. Responsibility, this refers to the degree of accountability and ensuring that the work gets completed before the given deadlines. Flexibility was another concept of organizational climate which talks about the absence of micromanagement, talks about the absence of unnecessary procedures, rules that might disrupt the smooth flow of working of the organizations. Another important concept of climate was reward systems, where the good performance is directly linked with the monetary aspect of at the compensation aspect of the employee. And the fourth is a culture of commitment, working as a team, how committed you are towards the work of the organization. So as the research proceeded, my keen interest, my area was to study both the aspect, I was mainly interested to know, since there was a lot of competition was seen amongst the public and private sector banks, I further decided to study this topic, compare both these topics where in between, and this study for this comparison, I decided to take one bank from the public sector and another bank from the private sector. So as far as for the public sector banks are concerned, while going through the reports of various public sector bank, one of the report that fascinated me was the Canara Bank. So let me give you a brief profile about Canara Bank. Canara Bank was founded in the year 1906 with its headquarters located at Bangalore. The vision statement of Canara Bank says to emerge as a preferred bank by pursuing global benchmarks in terms of profitability, operational efficiency, asset quality, risk management, and expanding global reach. Moreover, Canara Bank was also declared as a systematically important financial institution in the year 2011. In fact, it was the first bank which went for a ISO 9002 certification in the year 1995-96. During the period of research, the bank had almost 11 subsidiaries and more than 174 high-tech e-lounges. Canara Bank has also shown a prolific growth in its network. The number of branches have almost increased more than 500 times from 2014 to 2018, and an equal number of increase was also found in the number of ATMs. Similarly, the manpower profile has also shown a tremendous increase in the span of research or the research period. This was because mainly attributed to the different kind of human resource development activities that were done in the bank, which ranged from various activities like training programs. Different types of employee sensitization programs or training programs are conducted in the banks from time to time. The bank also changed its organizational setup from a 2-tier system to a 4-tier system with regional branches, head offices, circle offices, and the branching network. The bank also has a good vigilance setup headed by the chief vigilance officer, and every year they have a system of following a vigilance week. Moreover, in terms of security, the bank has got CCTV cameras installed at various branches, currency chest, and also different ATMs. The bank is equally working very well for women empowerment by providing financial assistance to the women to develop an entrepreneurial culture. Here, I would also like to say that Canara Bank also has something called as Mahila Branch Banking, where only female employees have been employed. So with such a rich profile of the bank, I decided to compare Canara Bank as the government bank along with one of the other leading bank of the private sector, and for this I chose Axis Bank. Axis Bank, formerly known as the Unit Trust of India. The size of the bank, the net worth of the bank is the third largest bank of the private sector in India, and it was one of the few private banks which began its operations formally in the year 1994. With a variety of products, the Axis Bank vision statement also reads to be a preferred financial solutions provider. During the period of research, it was found that Axis Bank also had many number of subsidiaries like the Canara Bank, and it was also the recipient of the Economic Times Award in the year 2015. During the year 17-18, it added almost 399 branches, domestic branches, and one offshore banking unit. Like Canara Bank, Axis Bank has also shown a humongous growth in terms of its branches and ATMs. More than 100% growth can be seen. Similar like Canara Bank, Axis Bank also has got n number of human resource development activities. They have got learning and development activities, something like as Axis Competency Profiler for developing for the career development of their employees. They have got different talent acquisition practices to retain the best talent in the bank. There are leadership development programs that are also conducted from year to year. The vigilance setup of the bank is also very strong. Axis Bank also has got its own policy on human rights, which articulates its commitment to the human rights of their employees. So with such a prolific profile of both the banks, the research study headed to compare the organizational effectiveness. What do the employees of both the banks feel about the effectiveness of the bank, and whether this effectiveness is also affecting the climate amongst various branches of these banks, was the whole crux of my PhD research. So going ahead, the main objectives of the study were divided into 4 parts. Basically, I wanted to compare the effectiveness and climate of both the banks, the climate and effectiveness in terms of its totality, as well as a comparison of various dimensions of the climate. The second objective being, the PhD research also focused on studying the relationship between effectiveness of the banks and the climate of the banks, also among its dimensions. In the third part, various demographic variables, what we call it as a background variables, which support your study. So the research study also comprises of a comparison of Canara and Axis Bank on the basis of gender, on the basis of educational qualification, and on the basis of the work experience. And with all these comparisons and relationships studied, the fourth objective, the last objective, was to give some bank specific measures and some common measures to both the branches and both the banks to enhance their effectiveness and improvise on the climate of the banks. So for a good research is one which is not just exhaustive. A good research is also a research where the researcher knows clearly what the title is, what are his objectives, and to achieve, at the end, I will say that the research is complete only when my objectives of research are achieved. So to achieve these objectives, we have to convert the objectives into hypotheses, which are further tested with the help of statistics, and then we give the findings. So to achieve these objectives, there were various sets of hypotheses and sub-hypotheses that were framed for the study. The first set of hypotheses, since the first objective focused on studying the difference, I have assumed that there are no significant differences in both the climate as well as the effectiveness of both the banks in terms of totality, in terms of various dimensions of both the variables. The second objective was to study the relationship between both the variables, that is effectiveness and climate. So I have hypothesized, the study hypothesized that there is no significant correlation between effectiveness and climate, and also further a sub-hypothesis was formed to study whether the different dimensions of effectiveness are affecting the climate and vice versa, whether the different dimensions of climate are affecting the effectiveness. The third objective was to compare both the banks on basis of selected demographic variables, for the purpose of which here the comparison is made, interbank comparison, where I have compared gender amongst both. What are the differences in Canara and Axis Bank with reference to its effectiveness and climate on the basis of gender. So interbank comparison is also done, as well as intrabank comparison. What only the males and females of only the Canara Bank and only Axis Bank also have to say about the effectiveness and climate of the banks. So the first comparison on the first demographic variable was gender. The second demographic variable was the length of service, that is whether your work experience, whether the people who are more experienced have a different perception about the effectiveness and climate, was also compared between both the banks, as well as between interbank comparison and intrabank comparison was made. And the third demographic variable for the purpose of the study was educational qualifications, whether the qualified people are also making a difference in terms of the effectiveness of the bank and they are perceiving the climate differently, was also the area of study. So to study this, we will now discuss about the research design. So for any research, you have to have a well specified and a defined research design, which is a plan which will help you in completion of the research within the given constraints of time. So this type of research was a purely descriptive research, where I have described the climate as well as the effectiveness, and also compared both the banks on these aspects, and studied the relationship between both the variables. The sampling technique that was used, the next thing that comes is from whom are you going to collect the data and how are you going to collect the data. So here for this research, a stratified random sampling was used where Mumbai was divided into three stratas, three zones: Central Line, Western Line and Harbour Line. And from the between various stations CST to Kalyan, Churchgate to Danu Road, and from Chhatrapati Shivaji terminus to Panvel, various branches of the banks were covered. So in this way, using the stratified random sampling method for the purpose of research, I have visited almost 26 different branches of Canara Bank located across Central, Western and Harbour Line, and similarly 33 branches of Axis Bank. And in totality, the sample size comprised of 400 respondents, 200 employees from each bank working at different levels of management in both the banks. Now the next thing after deciding the sampling is how are you going to collect the data. There should be an appropriate method for collecting the primary data. So for this research, the primary data was collected with the help of a self-designed questionnaire. So this questionnaire, what we call it as a research tool, was divided into 4 parts. The first part being the demographic details of the respondents. The second part was the organizational effectiveness questionnaire. Third part, different questions on different dimensions of organizational climate. And the fourth part was the general suggestions for improvising the climate and the effectiveness of the bank. So before we administer the questionnaire to the final respondents, it is very necessary to ensure that the tool is both reliable as well as valid, for which we need to do what is called as a pilot testing. So for the organizational effectiveness, there were almost 32 questions in the research tool, on an average 5 to 6 questions on different dimensions, and the pilot testing was done. The pilot testing result in terms of Cronbach's alpha was quite satisfactory. Similar was the case with the pilot testing was also done for the organizational climate questionnaire, which comprised of almost 32 questions, 5 to 6 questions on an average for every dimension of the organizational climate. After administering the tool, it is also necessary how the researcher is going to change or convert the qualitative data into a quantitative data. So majority of the questions were based on an agreement scale. So this was the scoring pattern that was used for converting this qualitative data into the quantitative data. Now let us have a look at data analysis. The data analysis for the study was done in 2 parts. Descriptive analysis. So data was described by using various descriptive analysis measures like mean, median, mode and standard deviation. And for the purpose of inferential analysis, that is the hypothesis testing, the KS test, Shapiro-Wilk test, Mann-Whitney U test, Carl Pearson's formula for correlation, backward multiple regression and the Kruskal-Wallis test were used to test the different hypotheses of the study. Now coming to the findings of the study. The first objective was to compare the differences between both the banks in terms of effectiveness and climate. So the very first finding was there was no significant difference in both effectiveness as well as the climate of both the banks in terms of totality as well as in terms of the 6 different constructs or the dimensions in which these aspects were studied. It means that the people of both employees of both Canara as well as Axis Bank, they viewed there was no difference, there was quite a similarity between how they look at the effectiveness and climate of the banks. The second objective was to study whether there is a relationship between these 2 variables. The study revealed that there is in fact a strong positive correlation. The value of R being 0.7, there was a relationship between effectiveness and climate. Further, a relationship was also done between various dimensions and 2 things were very important. Dimension strategy and reward system were also correlated with each other, and so was the case between values and work commitment were also found to have a strong correlation. The next part of the objective was to study which aspects of organizational climate dimensions have an impact on the effectiveness. Here a very good finding was I had come across. Reward systems in the organization played a very important role in how people look at the effectiveness of the organization. So I will say here that the reward systems is important, the most dominant factor of organizational climate, which is definitely having a maximum impact on the organizational effectiveness. And on the similar lines, in terms of organizational climate, the value systems that are cherished in the organization have a maximum impact on how people look at the climate of the organization. In the third set, where the researcher intended to compare the different demographic variables, the findings on the basis of gender were also very interesting. There were no significant differences as far as the perception of organizational effectiveness was concerned on the basis of gender. But there was a significant difference that was found in the male and the female perception of organizational climate. Male and female employees of the banks, they differed in their opinion in terms of their opinion for organizational climate. The findings on the basis of length of service. The work experience also made a difference in the employees' perception of organizational effectiveness as well as organizational climate of the banks. And so was the case with educational qualification. Differences in the perception of organizational effectiveness were also found on the basis of qualification both for Canara Bank and Axis Bank. And so on the basis of these findings, now the researcher has given certain recommendations to exclusively Canara Bank and Axis Bank. Canara Bank being a government bank, resource availability for obtaining certain resources, government consent was required. So that is why which created a delay. So Canara Bank was advised, the management was advised to improvise on the position of resource availability. It was also found that though there is a good communication in the bank, there was no formal system of feedback. So the bank is also advised to give a formal feedback to design a formal feedback system for its employees and give the performance feedback from time to time. Bureaucracy has always been taking a toll on employee productivity. So the bank is also advised to reduce bureaucracy. Policymakers should also make a note that people in Canara Bank, on the basis of gender, there was a difference that was found in the way they pursue the organizational climate. And these differences in the feelings of the gender would create feelings of inequality and would spoil the climate of the banks. So due care and cognizance should be taken by the management, and at certain branches where people were found to be overloaded, additional staff it has been suggested that additional staff should be recruited at certain branches. Similarly, recommendations for Axis Bank. Axis Bank should continue on its employee assistance program. Axis Bank being the bank from the private sector, job insecurity, stress was found to be a major stressor among the employees. So they should have programs where the feeling of insecurity is reduced. They should also have more stress on people with professional qualifications, because it was found that in the findings that education also made a difference in the way people look at the climate of the banks. So the banks are stressed, or the banks are suggested to stress more on people with professional climate or professional qualification who can build on the good climate of the bank. And after giving the bank specific recommendations, some common suggestions were also given for enhancing the organizational effectiveness for both the banks. They should stress on more workforce excellence, but encouraging communication is the only way one can express his interface to others. So free flow of communication is also encouraged. Focus on corporate governance practices for more accountability, integrity, and transparency is also suggested. The bank should also have good plans for mitigating different types of risk. And finally, there should be also well-designed compensation packages for the different people working at different levels in the bank. Similarly, recommendations were also given for our improving organizational climate. This can be mainly done by avoiding favoritism, which will lead to the feelings of inequality, setting good benchmarks for implementing the best practices, developing a climate of trust for excellent delivery of services. Revision in the bankers' compensation was also suggested. Bank should also continue with its practice of providing different types of training opportunities for the staff, and the banks were also advised to conduct the climatic survey from time to time to ensure maintaining a congenial climate in various branches of the bank. With these recommendations being suggested to the management, this study is going to definitely will be useful to two sets of people. One is the policy makers, who can use the suggestions and improvise and build good policies for the people in the organization, and definitely it would also provide insights to the management of both the banks, who can take steps to improvise on the effectiveness and climate that is prevailing in both the banks. Finally, a good research is also one. No research, I can say, is a complete research. It always leaves a space for some other researcher to do the research. So I have also mentioned, if the same study is to be done, how other researchers can take up the same study. So if the same variable, since the present research studies or the difference between the public and the private sector banks, the same variables can also be studied across foreign banks, comparing foreign banks, cooperative banks, different RRBs and credit societies. The variables mainly are studied with reference to banking sector. Same study can also be done with respect to companies from pharma sector, IT sector, insurance sector, non-banking financial companies, companies dealing in mutual funds and other financial products. Here, only the employee's perception about the effectiveness in climate is studied. So, likewise, customers' perception of the effectiveness and climate can also be studied. Organizational effectiveness can also be studied in terms of other financial parameters. And the study focuses on selected demographic variables like the length of service, educational qualification, and gender. So, a comparison of these two variables can also be done to see whether age, marital status, type of job, number of dependents in the family, and income level can also affect their perception of effectiveness and climate of the organization. With this, I would like to end my presentation, and I hope that my research acts as a guiding light and an inspiration for the young researchers to come ahead. Thank you.
ज्ञानेन सदृशं पवित्रमिह विद्यते नहि ज्ञानेन सदृशं पवित्रमिह विद्यते नहि ज्ञानेन सदृशं पवित्रमिह विद्यते